All over the United States and all over the world, relationships are going through their ups and downs right now. The Oxygen 365 podcast brings you some of the best relationship advice, thinking, and practical ideas available. Advice you can act on this moment, or tonight, tomorrow, or when you need it the most. Our collection of interviews with some of the top authors, speakers, and leaders in all aspects of relationships can help you grow, get through a trouble spot, or make an already good day great. Get ready to join our host, Noel Metter, as he interviews our guests each week, bringing you the best and most current information on improving your relationships. Whether you're dating, engaged, newly married, empty nesters, or in the thick of a problem, you're sure to gain something from our interview today. So without further delay, here's Noel with today's guest and a ton of solid, practical relationship advice.
Welcome to Oxygen 365. I'm your host, Noel Metter, and this is episode number 27. Today's guest is Michael Schindler. Mike is a Navy veteran who currently serves as the president of Operation Military Family, which is a government consulting and technology firm that specializes in veteran-centric solutions and business processes. He's a guest writer for several national publications and writes for the Military Wire blog. Mike is also a keynote and workshop speaker and the author of the book Operation Military Family, which is the focus of today's show. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Noel. Good to be here. Good to see you, my friend.
You know, it's so good to have you. This has been a long time coming, and I know that, you know, when it comes to helping our military family, there's no one more passionate about it than you. And so I just want to start by saying thank you for your service and then also your life work of really helping our military families. And you know, maybe we just start with your organization, Operation Military Family. I mean, it kind of says it all in a nutshell. But I think as it relates to couples, how are you intersecting and helping them when it comes to this really, really important mission?
Yeah, so that that got started with the book, right? I mean, that was a whole Tommy Franks thing, General Tommy Franks endorsing this thing, the Army thinking I'm some marriage relationship expert guy, and put me on their stage for 2 years and doing these pre and post deployment workshops, and what we saw by doing the workshops, which was very powerful, was understanding that we had to have some way to follow up, right? Some way to get these guys connected. And so that's why we kind of gravitated toward technology. And the whole idea was, can we reach these guys through technology so that we can bring them back into relationship? And I think that's what's powerful about what you guys do as well is through tech. That's just the entry point, right? That's not the panacea. That's not the end all be all. That's really the vehicle to get these guys back into relationships. So that's how we stay connected to these guys. Is every month we see new people coming through via technology, and we can get them connected to the right people based on what their need and based on where they're standing. So that's how we still stay connected to these folks.
That's great. Well, help us understand. I think for someone who's joining the military, what is it about the decision to make that step, and then for the spouse who's coming along for the ride, the challenges that they might face as they make this entry into the military. Can you speak to that for a moment? Just both, what is it about the step into the military? Why would it be, something that, what motivates them? And then for the spouse who's coming along in that journey, what do they need to know?
Wow, you know what? So the step into the military space is and when you look at the stats today, those that are getting into the military, I mean, it's kind of tough to get in. It used to be, sail or jail back in the day. It used to be, hey, last resort. It's not that way anymore. I mean, people are picking this because they have a sense of mission. So mission above self, right? They want to give back, or they want to be part of something bigger than just chasing a paycheck. Mm-hmm. And so the decision to get involved in the military is one of somebody saying, you know what, I want to be part of something bigger than me, just myself. And so when they get in, all of a sudden they understand, wow, man, it is different rules, it's different regulations. You're defending a constitution, yet some of the constitution doesn't apply to you, right? So it's a change of environment. And then if you're bringing a spouse along, it becomes a brotherhood, a sisterhood. So it becomes a big family. But what people don't understand is, much like law enforcement or first responders, is every time that individual, that service member or servicewoman goes out on mission, there is a chance that something bad can happen. And so that spouse is living on the edge, understanding that they too are devoted to the mission, right? Which in some ways they might have not signed up to be part of the bigger mission. They signed up to be part of the relationship and maybe not the mission. And in the military, mission comes before self, and sometimes that's where the couples struggle. I mean, Noel, you see that couples will struggle with that. Oftentimes, there's conflict, and it's so important that we pay attention to how do we resolve that conflict.
Yeah, and what have you seen? I know that you, in your book, you interviewed a lot of couples, and some great stories. Maybe you could share one of the stories too, just of how do couples deal with that in terms of the big mission, and oftentimes it's mission before self, which impacts the relationship. What are some key nuggets or practical advice that you would give to the couples as they're in this journey together?
Yeah, so it's when you're in a relationship in the military, it's much like planning a mission in the military, right? I mean, you got to sit down and you've really got to plan what your next steps are. And so the couples, like close to 100 couples that we interviewed, what we found a common theme is those that were succeeding in the relationships found time to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to navigate this way forward? Listen, I'm going to be deployed for 6 months or 12 months. And what are the steps necessary in order for us to have a successful deployment, both not only in mission, but in our marriage? What does that mean? So it really meant everything from, okay, what are the things that we got to do that's practical, the tactical steps, like, when does the garbage go out, what bills get paid, things along that line. But also it came down to, how are we going to communicate? And this is a big issue, right? This is different from when I was deployed. When I was deployed, it was snail mail, right? We had the helos come in and they dropped the mailbag, and we were all excited because you still got the letters with the perfume on it, and that was pretty exciting. Today it's Skype, right? It's email, it's text. There's a lot of ways for couples to communicate. So they really had to sit down and go, okay, listen, if we're going to have conflict or if we're going to discuss something major, let's determine what major means, right? If the toilet's overflowing and I'm deployed in Afghanistan or Iraq or on the borders of Syria or Poland or whatever, that's not a big issue for me. And understand that I'm not going to react like it is a big issue for me. Yeah. Right. So they would have to talk through issues like that. It might be a big issue for the spouse, but certainly not the individual deployed. So it was really creating those clear paths of communication and understanding what the red flag is. And when we talk about red flags, we talk about, okay, if I put up the red flag, that means this is a no-go. We can't have this conversation. The couples that are succeeding are the ones that have stop points, or what we call red flags, right? Issues that say, listen, I'm putting up the red flag, which means we can't have this conversation anymore via Skype or text or email. Because what happens at that point, if they go beyond the red flag issue, all of a sudden it becomes no man's land, which means we've had couples that actually say, you know what, you just irritated me, and now I'm going dark for 5 days, right? Yeah. And that's tough, because if you go dark, the couples, the spouse at home has no idea what's going on. Right. Wow.
What, and let's just talk about the deployment, because I think there's a lot in for the couple getting ready for that. And you just described that. There's the practical, but emotionally, how do they get ready emotionally?
Oh, geez, that's tough. They I know we had one couple that sat down and it's really hard, right? I mean, I'll tell you from just a personal experience. When in 2010, I spent about 10 months over in Boise doing some contract work for a company. And Carrie and I and our girls, we essentially had to make a decision to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to do this, right? Because I'd be gone for 3 weeks at a time and then come home on the weekends and then leave again. So I'd be home for 2 days and then leave and gone. That's not... I mean, that's I was able to come home more frequently than somebody that's deployed, right? Right. And so we came to the conclusion that you are not allowed to come to the airport with me, right? Because no, it was too tough. I got to tell you, every time I'd walk out and I look at my girls, I'm like, I know I'm coming home.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm not going.
You're not going into a war zone.
Not going into a war zone. Right. I mean, bar that the plane doesn't crash or something crazy doesn't happen, in a safe state. I'm coming home. Military couples, when they're on active duty, don't necessarily know that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So emotionally, you just got to say, man, I embrace the moments that we have today. And this is what these successful couples did, is said, okay, you know what, we've got 2 weeks, and what are we going to do? What's on our bucket list? What's on our to-do list? What are we going to do? How are we going to maximize the moments? And then when we're apart, what we realize is that love keeps us strong, keeps us together, and we're going to communicate weekly when we can, right? And I'll never forget Mike and Tanya that talked about this, that they set up prearranged times, and Tanya understood that sometimes those prearranged times got moved because of mission. Right.
But so this is a military couple that you're talking about in your book? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. They and he would text her and say, hey, listen, I can't make it. I'll call later.
Yeah.
Right. So it was just dropping those hints, those communication points. I don't know, Noel. I mean, today, the couples are still struggling. We talk about how marriages are getting stronger in the military, but the reality is, there's still a pretty high divorce rate in the military. It's tough, man. It's tough.
What degree do you see empathy playing into this? I mean, I just think that you have two different missions. You have the mission that's downrange, and then you have the mission back at home. And I think for both, the mission can be intense, but how does empathy play into that as it relates to the couple?
From our perspective, we see couples struggle with empathy, right? Because they're both, what happens is when you're deployed and you get on mission, and you likely see this in couples when you're working closely with couples, is they have to put the emotion and the empathy aside, right? They have to, and men are really good about this, right? I mean, Mark Gungor talks about, the boxes that us men live in. It's really true for those guys that are deployed. They got to put all that stuff in a box and say, right now, I don't have time for that. I can't be empathetic. I can't be emotional because if I am, it'll take me off my focus and my target, which is the mission. And I got to spend time on the mission, because if I don't spend time there, I might not come back. So we see couples struggle with this, Noel. You might see some couples that are really trying to, patch this together. The first 5 years are really difficult for young couples.
It is, and there's not necessarily one right answer. There's not a one size fits all. Let's talk about, in your book, you mentioned the first couple of weeks of deployment and how critical that is for the couple staying intact. What are some of the advice, strategies, action that you would? Well, maybe first describe why is it so critical, and then maybe some practical things that they can do.
Yeah, so it all comes down to action plan and support network, right? So the first few weeks are tough, because the first few weeks are there's a lot of emotion that's involved, right? For the spouse that's remaining behind, and certainly the individual that's being deployed, whether that's the husband or the wife. And so the first couple of weeks are really tough, and that's where they try to do their best to, and we say, do your best to really, in the first couple of weeks, to execute on your communication plan. And your communication plan, is that daily, is that weekly? For some couples, certainly it can be daily. Oftentimes it's late at night, which means that, one couple one of the couples, the individuals in the relationship, has to get up at 2 a.m, and the other person's up at 8 a.m, right? Time difference. But they've got to plan those first couple of weeks. And then when the deployment really gets speed, when they're in full tempo of a deployment, what we say there is, that things are going to change, right? Because every deployment, you can plan for 100% of a deployment, but understand that probably about 40% you're going to have to be flexible, or it might flip. 60%. You're going to have to be flexible. 40% is going to stick to plan. Just depends.
Right.
So
right.
It comes down to things that you and I have always talked about over the years, which is action plan and support network. What is your action plan? And it varies depending on the mission. And so while we give some practical steps in the book, we also tell couples that you've got to modify that depending on the branch of service, right?
Yeah.
An Air deployment's going to be different than a Navy deployment.
Right.
Same with an Army Marines.
So what are some I mean, I know that it makes sense. It would be it could change from every mission, but what are some practical things that you've mentioned in the book?
Yeah, so as far as just practical steps in those first couple weeks, right, is be sure that if you have kids, be sure that you keep your kids active, right? Mm-hmm. The big thing is it's going to be tough if mom or dad is deployed. One of the stresses that we see in relationships, especially with young couples that have kids, is the kids begin to focus on who is not there. And if you keep the kids active, if you keep them engaged, right, and you understand that, listen, mom or dad is not gone forever, or mom and dad is on an important mission, you highlight the importance of the mission, number one, why they're doing it, right? Because that gives them pride. That gives the kids pride.
Yeah.
What mom and dad is doing, but also keeping them engaged and active, right? Mm-hmm. And when we say engaged and active, that is oftentimes, hey, let's write mom or dad a letter, right? Do you want to draw them a picture? What do you want to do? Keeping that other person present in the family, despite the fact that they're gone, right? That's important the first couple of weeks. It's important throughout a deployment, but after the first couple of weeks, they'll begin to relax, right? Mm-hmm. Different from what we've seen with couples, which we say oftentimes journal your experience, what you're doing. Hey, these are very practical steps. And we saw this with Brian and Jody. Jody would journal every night, and she would just share her thoughts, right, in a journal, with the intent of eventually sharing that with Brian when he got back from a deployment. Okay, not necessarily sharing that while he's on.
Wow, I like that. Yeah. And was that purposeful on her part? Just because she understood the stress that he was under, and I don't want to bring this up during that time, or what was she journaling? Was it like, my gosh, I'm ripping my hair out over here, and I can't stand, that you're gone?
Yes, part of it is, you know what? I want to kill the kids, and you're so fortunate that you're deployed. You don't have to deal with any of this garbage, right? And yes, you'll see that in some of her journal notes. And what's interesting is she would share that in the beginning, right? Because she thought it's important that Brian knows this, and understand I'm changing names, but she thought, you need to know this. And Brian made it very clear that I don't need to know this, number one. Number two, I don't want to know this. Because number three, there's nothing I can do about it. Right.
As a guy, you want to fix it, but I can't.
Yeah, I can't fix it. I can't do anything. So stop it. It's bugging the stink out of me. So so what she understood is, okay, it's good for me to journal because I need to I need to express my feelings, right? And then when she understood that I can journal and it's a safe place for me to put my thoughts, and eventually Brian and I can share these when he gets back, and we can laugh about it because we'll be in a different place, right? Brian also understood for him, and this is how he stayed engaged throughout his 4 months of deployment, is he would Skype on a weekly basis and have his kids given a weekly update of what was going on in school. And where could he help on some of the homework issues, right? So that was pretty cool. He had the opportunity to be able to do that while he was on a deployment. So that's where I say, these are practical things that some couples can do. Not all couples can do that, right? Navy, it becomes a little bit more difficult. But again, the journaling is something that we've seen very successful, a successful tactical step for couples.
Yeah. Well, let's move the journey all the way to the end of the deployment, and they're coming back together. There's the reintegration. What are the things that they need to consider during that time as a couple, and as it relates to kids, if they have kids in the picture? What would be some practical advice?
Yeah, so practical is, listen, life is going to change again, right? I mean, whoever has been home has suddenly, if they have been second in command, right? We talk about this, male-female relationship. There's one general and there's a lieutenant general, right? Or an admiral and a vice admiral, that type thing. But what happens is when the couples separate, right? And think about this. This is like a forced separation. It's voluntary, right? Because they join the service, right? But it's in many ways a forced separation. And what happens under a forced separation in the military is all of a sudden you develop an independent life, right? I mean, think about this. So that the individual that's left at home has suddenly had to take full responsibility for everything that is going on at the home front, making all the decisions, paying all the bills, doing all the things, dealing with the kids, etc., right? Everything. And now you've got that second member of the team that's coming home, right?
Yep.
His or her way, right?
Yep.
You get home, understand, wait a second, things are not the way I left them. This becomes a problem oftentimes. And the other individual's like, no, you need to fit into how I've got things working. This operational strategy that I have working here at the home front is working very smoothly, and you are not to disrupt it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the rub that we see happens when couples reunite.
Yeah.
So what they have to do is, and I'll tell you a funny story. It turned out funny. It wasn't funny at the time. Okay, so I'll foreshadow and say it turned out great, but when it happened, it wasn't so great. The Brian and Jody, I'll go back to this couple. She wrote, and you'll find this in the book. She wrote Brian an email that had 20 things. This is what you need to prepare for when you come home. Okay?
Only 20?
Only 20. I think it was 20. It might be a little bit more. I have to go back and look. But I mean, and it was funny. I thought it was funny. Brian did not think it was funny.
Yeah.
Okay. He was like, what are you doing telling me? Okay. That was his attitude, right? Because he's, command level, and he's thinking, hello, I'm going back to my command, and this is my command, and you're telling me what I need to prepare for? They laugh about it now, right? But she was like, hey, this is what the kids have been dealing with. This is what I've been dealing with. This is how we have things that are moving, quite well. Now, you have to have that conversation, but each couple has to decide how they're going to have that conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And it really starts with the question is, okay, honey, how do we make this work, right? How are we going to make this work? Because I'm coming home, and you've got things going the way you want things going. How the first couple of weeks are going to be tough, and really the first couple of weeks are tough, okay, for most couples, is how do we make this work? And each couple has to ask each other that, right? I mean, each individual in the relationship has to ask each other that. That's what we found worked for the 4 that we highlighted in the book, was they each said, okay, what do I need to do to serve you to make this time better? Okay,
so are you talking about like a compromise at the end of the day, or
talking compromise? And let me tell you, I don't care if you're deployed or not. If you're in relationship, compromise is so hard sometimes, right? So, yeah, it's even more difficult for these guys. Yeah, they got to compromise. It's tough.
Mm-hmm. And so, are you advocating that? I mean, I know that's a part of her story, but creating a list of 20 things to kind of alert them to here's what's happening as you come back. Is that a strategy that you would say is effective?
I'd say it's effective, but you got to know your spouse, right? You got to figure out, is my spouse going to react positive, in a positive way to this? But yeah, it's almost like a pre-brief, right? Before you go on your next mission. And that's really how the couples have to talk through this is, listen, okay, your next mission, your next assignment is, guess what? You're coming home. Okay. So let me give you the lay of the land, right? Here's what's going on. And that's really the approach. And that's really, Jody attempted to keep it, funny and creative and light. Brian just wasn't in that mindset because of some of the things that he had seen on deployment. So you gauge it, but really you do have to give each person the lay of the land. And if the person coming home gives his spouse the lay of the land as well, listen, understand, this is some of the stuff that I've been through. Now that I'm coming home, I can tell you that this is some of the stuff I've been through. Just understand, give me grace, right? Both individuals have to understand that the first, and it could take 12 months, Noel.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen people struggle with this for 12 months, is there's got to be a lot of grace involved for the first 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the, we all know that there's the new normal, coming back from deployment. Every deployment creates a new normal. But for those couples who, when they come back, all of a sudden, one spouse, and generally the spouse that stayed at home, starts to notice that things are just really off. Like they're just not working. We're not just talking the typical communication blocks or, just typical conflict, but really that this is not right. Like there's just something not going on here. What would you say to them? What's the step to help them instead of just going the path of, hey, we're going to divorce and we're just going to throw all this away because we just can't make it work? What would you say to them?
Yeah, so this is where we oftentimes talk about, a threesome's healthy for your relationship, right? And what we meant by that.
Yeah, please do explain.
Yeah, I'll explain that as is mentorship is so important, right? Having a third party, having an outside party, a mentor, a relationship couple, somebody that you can turn to that says, hey, how do we navigate these steps, right? And this operates in business too, Noel. I mean, you and I have often talked about this, is we often want to find those people in our lives that we want to aspire to be, right? Who is it? What couple? Is there a couple that's, made it for 40 years, right? 45 years, 50 years? What are the things, what are the steps that they've learned? In the military, I mean, there's licensed marriage family therapists, there's PTSD counselors, there's a number of those. The challenge is oftentimes, especially for the men, is to seek a counselor is to be viewed as weak, right? I don't want to be diagnosed with PTS because, if I'm going to stay in, that's going to be, a bad mark on my service jacket, which it's not, but that's the perception, right? So it really is, what type of coach is available to you? And we talk about that often, is guys, stop looking at counseling as a crutch. It's not. You need to look at an outside mentor as a coach. Who's going to help you? Who's your battle buddy through this? Listen, if you're going through a firestorm in your relationship, what are you going to do? You're going to quit? You don't do that in battle, right? You can't. When you're in the firestorm in battle, you can't just stand up and go, you know what, forget it, I'm done.
Right.
You got to press on, push through it, figure it out. It's no different in a relationship. And sometimes you got to call in backup. And backup is that coach or that mentor that you have in your life that you engage and say, listen, it's not going well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure how we're going to navigate, so help me.
Yeah. Yeah. Final question. I think we're talking about active duty and, the deployment cycle. But what about transitioning out of the military? I know that you've been in that space. You've worked with a lot of families. What are the unique challenges that they face? And then what are some of the things that you would ask, practical advice that you give to them?
Yeah. So this is, we're seeing more of this, right? Especially with the downsides that the Army, is doing, the some 100,000 that are going to, get out on top of what attrition's out over the next 2 to 3 years. It is really, it's a new landscape, right, for these couples, right? You go from the security, especially if you've been active duty for a while, you go from the security of having a very close-knit brotherhood in many ways, okay, to suddenly having to make all sorts of different decisions that you didn't necessarily have to make before when you were active duty. So the transition period, the first 12 months, again, seem to be very difficult, right? The goal is, how do I get a job? Well, they're overcoming some perception issues, right? Unfortunately, the VA's done a fabulous job of saying, hey, PTSD is a big issue. So what happens is in corporate America, oftentimes, those that are hiring are thinking that those are getting out might be struggling with PTS. The reality is fewer than 20% struggle with that, right? There's more civilians struggle with it. But again, so they're having to combat some civilian perception, number one. Okay. Number two is they're thinking that their service is going to be a fast track or a gateway into a professional career. Okay. They need to understand that they almost have to prove themselves for the next 2 years in corporate America before they'll elevate faster than their corporate civilian counterpart, right? So they still got to go through a boot camp period when they get back into corporate America. That's tough for somebody that's been commanding troops, that has been on the lines, right? So they just have to understand that, listen, you know what? The next couple of years after I get out is almost like a boot camp period for me. I'm going to have to just suck it up. I'm going to have to embrace the suck, as my friend Mark Devine, Navy SEAL, says, embrace that suck, and just understand that eventually you'll transcend that, but it's going to be tough for the first couple of years. Yeah. And you got to get out of military jargon. I mean, you got to find this, hey, listen, great story. We had an individual go to one of our seminars, the corporate seminars, and he came up to me afterwards and he said, Mike, listen, I'm a sniper. How am I possibly ever going to get a job? Right? I mean, think about that. Right. Yeah. Well, we're working with this high-end retailer, and I said, well, let me tell you what I hear when you say that to me is you've got attention to detail, you're patient, right? And what you've got to do is you've really got to help these, transitioning couples understand what their strengths are and how to put it into civilian speak. And that's, people that are in corporate can oftentimes interpret that I know that you can interpret that oftentimes, but they've got to remove. They've got to highlight the attributes, not so much the tasks that they did in the military.
Yeah.
What are the attributes?
Yeah.
Being a sniper, that's your job. What are the attributes of being a sniper? I'm patient, attention to detail, right? Those type of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Mike, I want to say thank you for sharing. I know that what we're talking about is his book, Operation Military Family. And in that he gives, one of the things I love about it is very actionable steps. This is not theory. This is practical, and it's stuff that you can apply immediately and begin to use in your relationship. So we'll have more of that on this page, just a link out to his book. But Mike, I want to say thanks. Thanks for joining us, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. Great seeing you, my friend. Good spending time with you.
All right. Take care.